All right, we're right at 11:30, so go ahead and start off, and if folks trickle in, they trickle in. So I feel like we've done a lot of talks on using AI for program generation for like the bulk of the work that many of us do day in and day out. Today I want to touch on the stuff that sort of falls between the cracks of that. A lot of us have something like thought leadership on a box in our career path. And so we're going to talk about doing knowledge work types of things with LLMs today. So to start off, we're going to start with not like 15 laws of generative AI or even 10. It's really just the one that matters. The tool doesn't really care about your outcomes at all. It only cares that you can continue to engage with it. So knowing that, go in with the mindset of, it's just trying to get me to interact with it more. Let me make sure that the output that I get out on the other side is actually useful to me. If I was going to break that down into a couple of other big ideas, generative AI isn't really magic. It's a learnable, interacting with it is a learnable skill. Reps and structure are how you get better at that, so intentional learning types of things. And bad output will always happen. No matter what you do, no matter how elegantly crafted your prompt, no matter how pristine your data, it will spit out garbage eventually. Know that and figure out how to iterate with it. So to start off with, you're really going to have to put in the work. I know that for our first few interactions with LLMs, they can feel really, really magical, right? There's this big, flashy spectacle. It emits tons and tons of text or very spectacular images. But back behind the scenes, there's someone that's working a machine. They're pulling knobs and twisting levers and trying to make the thing generate output that you're going to personally find appealing so that you come back to the service again and again and again. And whenever you interact with these tools to generate things, that's you. So you're going to need to do all of the operation of the machinery to get things to work. Let me sort of illustrate this with a case study. I'm going to be going to the Kansas City Developer Conference here in a couple of weeks. Part of that is always outreach, right? Who's going to hire us? Who should I talk to learn more about public speaking or to learn cool things about software? So I wanted to know, hey, like, who should I run into here? This is the thing I often ask BizOps for, but I thought this at bat I would try to get there with generative AI. So I did the most natural thing you can think of. Hey, who should I meet at KCDC this year? That did not work. The output from this was trash. Because how could it not be, right? Like it's so generic. It provided things from previous years, speakers that are no longer alive, all sorts of things. So you're going to have to put in effort to get something meaningful out. And the work, there are different ways of casting it. This is my model for it. So this is my pipeline for interacting with LLMs for things that aren't code. And that first step there, who should I meet at KCDC, is just the barest minimum, right? I had an idea. Hey, I'd like to know the answer to this question, but I hadn't refined the task in a way that was useful to the system or to myself. I hadn't figured out what inputs the system was going to need to be able to answer my question, nor had I constructed a prompt that was likely to generate output I would find useful. This part I did do, and I evaluated the output and found it wanting. So part of the issue is that that general idea isn't refined enough to be useful. Who should I meet at KCDC is so wildly generic. There are different types of people that I want to meet for different reasons. Sometimes I want competitive intelligence. There are other people out there that are experts in AI that talk about the subject. What do they say? Is it wildly different than my approach? Or do I like really disagree with it and need to write a position paper and call somebody out? Sometimes it's to grow my professional network and meet other people who are organizing conferences so that I'll get invited. And sometimes it's to try and find people that will purchase from SEP. But the real question here is like, well, what are the inputs? How am I going to build enough information that the system can answer for me? To do that, I like to think about the prompt. So we'll go into it in more detail. There are a lot of different ways of constructing a prompt. This is, I think, the 101 version of it, though. So a prompt consists of a persona. What persona should the system act in? What is it that I want it to do? What information do I need to provide it that I don't think it'll have built into it from when it was trained on the entirety of the internet circa 2023? And what output would I like the data in? So for input data, obviously I'm going to need to give it a persona to act in and a description of what my personal goals are here. So some sample context. I told it who I was. I told it a little bit about what I wanted and what I was trying to achieve with the task. But additionally, it was going to need context for me. Sorry, I skipped the persona piece. In this particular case, I didn't feel like I needed to supply a persona. I felt like the question was one anyone should be able to answer. But I could have said, you're a business ops professional that works inside of a software product consultancy. Please answer the question through that lens. Anyway, I gave it some information about me. I'm an AI strategist with a doctorate in combinatorial optimization. I've been in grant fulfillment in sort of defense for 5 years. I spent some time in computer security startups. And then I've been here at SEP for 6 years. I have a lot of public speaking experience between classrooms and academic conferences and now industrial conferences. And I'm trans. And here are some folks that I know, because the system has no way of knowing what my personal social network is. So, here are people that I know well. And I specify the people I know well because, I don't need to run into Joel Tosi. Joel Tosi knows my name. And whenever he sees me at a conference, he makes sure that we grab a beer together. I don't need to put in the effort anymore. But these folks down here, these are more important to me. These are nascent connections where I've met them once or twice. I think they're interesting. And I'd like to, be reminded to bump into them again to try and cement that relationship. Similarly, I need to give the system, again, more and more information about me. Here's some of the things that I like to speak about at these conferences. Case studies is the big one that I go talk about. And in particular, I'll be giving the AI and highway maintenance talk there. Or is it lumber mills? I don't remember. One of those two case studies is going to be given. And then here are some other general AI talks that I give. But I keep a library of things like this, descriptions of myself, libraries of talks that I've given, libraries of articles that I've written. But it's not just a set it and forget it kind of thing. The stable of writing that I've produced, the stable of talks that I've produced, and my context for a given conference changes over time. So I can't just do that. I have to update those as I go along, or I'm going to get stale outputs. There was one other thing that it needs, though, right? It doesn't need to just know about me. It needs to know enough about KCDC to answer the question. And in that particular case, it looks like this. Hey, go scrape these websites. Here are where all the speakers are. Here's the agenda so that you can see what those speakers are talking about as opposed to just where they work. And here are the number of people who have signed up to give money for the conference and will have booths, because I'm going to want to talk to those folks as well. They're the ones that are likely to buy. I don't know why I have a picture of the prompt here. My bad. Oh, because I was going to talk about what the actual ask was. So here was the prompt that I used for asking which speakers that I should run into. So given that I have limited time, give me a list of 10 people. And I used our 4 Cs, right? A client, someone who can buy; connector, someone who can introduce me; coach, someone who might teach us; colleague, someone we might hire. And then I've got a 5th one, which is just someone who's cool that I want to run into and meet, form a stronger relationship with. Additionally, please give me something to break the ice. And I didn't just ask for a single task, right? That was for speakers, and that covers these 2. But I also have this remand. This thing that I have to do when I go out and talk. So I generated another prompt for that. Who should I meet from the sponsor set? And it's a very similar prompt. in general, I find when you ask an LLM to do two things simultaneously, it does neither very well. As specific as you can be is as specific as you should be. So the rest of my prompt stayed pretty consistent, right? Information about me, information about our company, information about who's at the conference, that was static. The persona I wanted it to act in, that was static. But the fundamental center of the request, that was the thing I was changing out. And I find that that's pretty common for a type or genre of task. The specific request is the thing that changes frequently. So here's some actual output that it gave me. It gave me a nice markdown formatted table. I happen to use Obsidian for note-taking. With things like name, where the person works, what their talk title was. It should have given me the time of their talk, but it didn't manage to fill that in. I had to do it later. And it told me who these people were. And like I happen to know that Ash, I can't pronounce their last name, but Ash is a pretty cool person. They're a non-binary person in tech, and they do a lot of advocacy around that. But when I went to click through to their profile page, well, I didn't get it. What I got was their speaker profile from Star Trek, the conference we met at. So this is useful context about the person, but it isn't the thing I specifically asked for. It's sufficient for the task I want to do, right? Having some cliff notes about the individual in order to meet them at the conference. But it's not perfect output, and you should never expect it to be. It also gave me some openers. I'll show the ones that it gave me for clients or for sponsors rather than individuals, right? So for Temporal's approach to managing complex workflows, really impressive. How do you see it being applied in industries where failure is not an option? Because we're interested in like medical device, flight, high cost of failure, high regulation industries. Anyone notice a problem with this? No human being talks this way. If you speak like that to a person at a conference, they will think you are a pod person. This is very, very unnatural. But like in general, it's not bad either. So their project-based consulting model is very similar to ours. I can strike up a conversation around that. I will never use these words. So maybe I should have asked it for topics rather than openers. But I find that the narrative flow didn't get me out of, or didn't break what I needed from the request from the system. Now, you may not be in the business or the habit of regularly speaking at conferences, but you probably do similar things. Maybe you go to meetups, maybe you work evening events here at SEP where you have a bunch of people into the building. We've got that long list of people who are attending. You could use this to do similar research. The core of what's going on here, though, is read some relevant documents, summarize those documents for me, in this case, things I have written and the agenda for the conference, and then answer some questions about those documents. So that could be meeting notes, industry briefs, personas of various types of users. I'm going to bang on this particular drum all day because the output of the LLM should never be the thing you ship. So generative AI does exactly the thing it says on the tin. It generates, it makes stuff, but it doesn't always make great stuff. So I was at a innovation and AI networking event that shall remain nameless to preserve the dignity of the guilty. And someone up front presenting to the whole room said the following, give or take. Yeah, I just give it a prompt and maybe a couple of writing examples and you're basically done. This was on generating sort of soft marketing copy for LLMs and home pages. Don't do this. You want LinkedIn slop? Because that's how you get LinkedIn slop. It's going to be like words for sure, and maybe people will engage with them, and it might even be in your voice, but some of the takes will be idiotic or flat out wrong. So that workflow I showed you earlier was a lie. You do need to evaluate the output, and then you're going to have the very, very heavy lift of refining it into something that's actually useful. So for this particular example, something from my personal professional life here, what exactly is thought leadership? There are a lot of ways you might interpret it, what I'm doing now, but I also write a bunch for SEP to try and give a point of view that people might find when they search for AI in our company. But I like the writing I do, I'm proud of it, but I am unhappy with it in one respect. It's sort of a potpourri of topics, and it doesn't cover a single through line, interestingly. There's not like a narrative thread there. So I was like, oh, maybe that's a thing that would make me feel better about all this writing. So I gave it a new prompt. Hey, I'm an AI expert. I have a lot of experience. Here's some stuff that you can read of mine. But what I'm really looking for is a slate of blog articles that I can write over the remainder of the year that will help establish me as a thought leader in AI. I'm looking to identify topics and themes to write on and a coherent sequence of those. If you don't think that's a good idea, feel free to push back on me, ask any clarifying questions you need to before providing a response. I find that this thing is magical because what these things really do is reveal things you already knew yourself just via a Socratic dialogue, effectively. The clarifying questions it asked were very, very relevant, and I should have provided them up front, to be frank, right? If you're writing to gain influence or impress people, you ought to know who your audience is ahead of time. That's perfectly rational. I should be writing with a goal in mind, especially if I'm doing writing professionally, that it asked me was useful. Unique point of view, things like this, if you've thought about point of view work or personal branding, these are the sorts of things that come up. And here's a good one, like, don't let your eyes get too big for your stomach. How much can you actually write, Jordan? Maybe less than I might like. But after questions answered and a brief dialogue entered, it gave me an arc of things. So here's some articles, some of which I've already written. Yes, this is the AI revolution, just like the other ones. I've been doing this for a while. I've seen a bunch of hype cycles, and I'm angry about the current discourse. Different discussion. And why skepticism makes you a better AI buyer. These are things that are maybe more relevant to our clients that I wouldn't choose to write about except by prompting. But the entirety of it wasn't right. It was directionally correct, right? Like, I could write to these things. They aren't quite what I need yet, but we can refine them a little bit. There were parts of it that were bad, though. So, I really liked ARC 1. Let's leave it alone. But we're going to iterate on ARC 2 because it was very focused on LLMs as the ersatz user interface. And I didn't like that take. I wanted to talk about LLMs as another element in the pantheon. And so, much like Patrick Swayze in Ghost, what I'm doing here is I'm sitting behind the LLM, guiding it to do the right thing, to produce output that I want. And it's going to take a lot of iterations. By the time you're done, you should look like Leslie Nielsen in Naked Gun 2.5, right? You're going to have worked on this a lot. So I was, let's iterate on the second arc. We got to the third arc. Hey, this specific article, I don't care for. We're going to replace it with something else. My favorite part of all of these things are things like this, where you're like, I don't like that. Excellent pushback. You're right. LLMs as UX idea is catchy, but blah, blah, blah. I hear Tinny Tim in my head every time. Fine kick, sir. But all it can do is engage with you, right? It's not going to be offended, and it's being sycophantic because that's a way of getting people to continuously engage with the thing. If you find this sort of cloying behavior obnoxious like I do, you can set personas up front. You can act it to act like an expert from the Generation X, and it will be snarky and sardonic as you could ever want. Do I have another point here? So it's a lot of iteration. That's largely the thrust. And it doesn't stop when you have the collection of topics, right? You can go deeper. Rather than just saying, hey, here's a topic, please write to it, what you might want to do is say, hey, here's a topic, let's work on an outline. So here's a supply document. It's literally the slate of articles we'd like to write. I want to write the outlines with the context of the whole slate in mind. Here are some ways I've written in the past. Please read them. And also, here's an outline I've produced. And here's the document that was generated from that outline. So know roughly how much I expand a given outline and what I expand things into. That's important because I'm going to ask you to hit a target number of words. So So produce an outline and only the outline, and you'll find that you'll want to reiterate certain things about output again and again and again because it's not good at listening. Give it a target. I want to have the outline expanded to between 1,200 and 2,000 words because people won't read more than about 5 minutes. And we're only going to work on the outline for the supplied post number, which is just the first one, which is, yes, this is the AI revolution like all of the others. And then we did this again and again and again for the second article and the third article, and when I eventually get to them, the fourth and the fifth and the sixth, given the other articles already in context for the LLM. So any kind of creative writing endeavor can be built this way. If you're brainstorming product names with tone and style constraints, like maybe let's not mention Guy Fawkes in front of our English customers. If you're trying to sequence internal training content, arguing about whether generative AI should go first or ML, you might have used a product like this. Building proposals for modular outlines could be done in this way. And anytime one of you want to write project updates for the Slack channel, blog posts for the SEP site, or if you just like writing for your personal pleasure, it can be useful there. Finally, like any skill, you have to practice. So really, when you get to these final two steps, what you're trying to do is close the loop. I didn't start my timer. And I find that by paying attention to what isn't working, I can improve my process quite quickly. Irritation makes pearls is a thing that my father was fond of saying, and I have picked up on. So when I get to the evaluation step, usually I'm going to go back to one of these three boxes. Sometimes I'll find that the LLM didn't understand the task, or I'll look at the output and find that I didn't understand the task. It gave me something that was useful, but the thing that I asked it to do was not helpful. And so I need to refine what I am thinking about as the query. So for example, in that first iteration of asking who I should meet at KCDC, I was not specific about sponsors versus speakers and why I would want to meet them. I needed to iterate on the task to get there. Often the inputs are bad. So I will forget when the model that I am interacting with was trained and whether or not the thing that I am discussing is a concurrent topic or not. Alternatively, I will assume that the LLM knows everything I know about D&D and I want some rule education, but it turns out that a lot of people on the internet are wrong about D&D rules, and so I'd be better served by reading in a PDF directly. That was a very knowing look. I'm very excited to hear more about that. And sometimes the prompt is just bad. As much as I hate to say it, prompt engineering matters. Being clear and crisp in your language, structuring the prompt, and making sure that it doesn't contain extraneous information are all extremely critical. This all should look familiar to you because it's just bog standard process improvement stuff. You run the process, you observe where the friction is, you hit the bit that didn't work the right way. In addition, I find that not only is my process of building these things out in the LLM getting better, but I'm getting better about doing it. I come to a given task with more clarity when I am regularizing it for machining. I know that I need to break it down into small steps and interact with it in small pieces. And so I found that that has made me better at doing that also when I'm delegating tasks to an intern or to a junior software engineer. The real trick here, though, is to not lower your expectations. You should care about the output at exactly the same level you did if you didn't include the LLM in the process. You don't want to let yourself fall into the trap of accepting mediocre output just because it happens to be machined. Especially with things that are going to carry your name or SEP's brand. That's very, very important. And then here's some use cases that didn't fit in the rest of the talk. So I really like this stuff for avoiding, I have a document that wasn't invented for exactly the purpose that I need it for, but I can reuse it. So there have been times where I have a whole presentation ready, but I need the tweet or the LinkedIn post or the blog post version. And it's extremely good at doing that. Here is the entire slide deck as a PDF, produce for me the outline, and then work the rest of the process. For tweets, you can kind of go directly. Similarly, converting audiences. So I had Ryan Shoddy ask me for I wrote an internal document on RAG. Like, here's what RAG is from an engineering perspective. Here's what we're going to be doing in the Learn Code Gen Tools group for the next week, just to give people some context about how those systems are built. He's like, this is great, but it's not targeted at clients. Can I have a version of this targeted at clients? It wouldn't have been the heaviest lift in the world to rewrite that article by hand, but using these tools and saying, hey, please give me a version of it for a client was a lot lighter. This is the specific prompt. Help me rewrite the following article in a voice that's not directed at internal members of my consultancy, but instead more suited to consumption as passive marketing content for external folk. Please preserve the conversational tone, ask me clarifying questions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you saw the RAG article that went onto our front page, it was initially generated this way and then heavily edited. Yeah, here's an example of doing it via presentations. So, here's the presentation. I want a blog article. Here's my targeted audience. Please go do the thing. Again, none of these are finalized outputs, but they are sufficiently close to done that I can carry them the rest of the way across the line in less time than it would have taken me to write the whole thing from scratch. So anytime you're looking to do things like turn internal retros into case study, or convert research notes on a topic into a conference pitch, summarizing slide decks into an executive summary for an email, or trying to gather like tribal knowledge from Slack conversations into a team wiki, things like this can be very effective. Additionally, this talk was built the same way. This is a dog fooding exercise. So I knew that I wanted to give a talk on not the coding portion, because everyone was talking about the coding portions. So I started to collect raw notes and files over about 6 weeks. I wrote down every interaction I had with an LLM, what I was doing, what the goal was, where it fell down. I used a conversation with the LLM to help shape the learning goals for this talk and to shape the structure of how I captured those notes so that it would be more useful to the system downstream. And then from there, I iterated with the tool to build the outline. I iterated on the outline myself from there to build the entire talk. Anytime you're building a training deck, that kind of thing is extremely useful. Onboarding for a team, internal training slides. We didn't use this for the AI training sessions that you're all going through, but I think largely because we hadn't had the idea yet. And I can't quite actually say that for certain. I don't know how Steven built his deck. But anytime you're trying to build a document from other artifacts that you have lying around, whether those are transcripts of recorded conversations or Slack conversations, or email back and forth, this can be very helpful. I will say, in sort of closing, the tools I use are immaterial. Any paid version of any LLM as a service will do this kind of stuff for you. I personally am using OpenAI's ChatGPT stuff right now just because I wanted to try one of them pretty exhaustively before moving on to the next. Sometimes there are things that I don't want going out across the internet, and I'll use Ollama for that. I do a lot of stuff with recorded voice and transcribing. I run Whisper locally to do that just so I don't have to pay for it. And I use Obsidian for note-taking because it lets me have a local wiki with Markdown, and text-based stuff is easier to process for these systems than like a PDF or a print or HTML or anything else. So with that said, one second, we'll get to the end. Begrudgingly, I must admit that Shia LaBeouf was onto something. You just have to engage with the tooling, at which point you will slowly begin to improve and find where it works for you and where it doesn't. Sorry to cut you off, Rob. What do you want?
It's cool. I was going to ask about Obsidian. Do you have a tool that lets it directly interact and enter and structure your Obsidian wiki, or is it more like
So there are tools that do that. There are plugins that will allow you to drop an entire document into it, and there are tools that will suggest connections in your document via a vector database. But I do not know of a tool that will take the graph notion that's inside of Notion or Obsidian and build a RAG via graph that way. I feel like that's a gap in the ecosystem that's going to be filled eventually either by me or someone else. Hopefully someone else, because I don't want to build and maintain a tool, but I'd really like to have one in that vein. Yeah.
So when you're working through the loop and you're going from evaluating back to say like the prompt,
Yeah.
do you try to stay within the same session, or are you still frequently starting new sessions?
It depends. And that question has gotten muddier recently. So often I will try to stay in the same session, but sometimes it will get itself stuck. The context window will be filled with garbage, and I'll want to throw it away to start with a clean slate. That is less possible now because like ChatGPT, for example, as a service, remembers things about me across conversations. But especially for the types of writing I do, I contain multitudes, and I do not want it to do that. I don't want it to know about tabletop me when I'm writing professional copy about programming, but it does muddle those things. There are solutions around that, but they're more heavy-handed. I could set up an Azure instance with, ChatGPT 03 or something like that and control exactly how much memory and context it has, but that's a whole thing. To answer the question you actually asked, I don't blow it away unless it's not doing the thing that I would like it to do, in which case I construct a new chat and start over from scratch. Here's where we were. Here's what problem I have. Now let's go again.
You said you start over from scratch. You don't try to take how far you made it from the previous session?
I do. Sorry. To be clear, I try to start the context over from scratch with the current draft and the goal. Sometimes that'll look like, here's the outline, here's the learning objectives, here is the draft as written so far, and here are my problems with it. Is that what you're after? Okay. Yeah.
Not so much a question, but another tip I found when interacting is kind of for multimodal use. I was trying to get ChatGPT to give me an image of a robot for a one-shot, and it was a Mr. Gutsy robot.
Sure.
Fallout, which is a very unique robot.
Yeah.
So trying to go directly from like Mr. Gutsy, I want a version of Mr. Gutsy that's a ninja.
Yeah.
That didn't work. But when I asked it to say, okay, go describe for me everything about a Mr. Gutsy robot, it says, well, it has 3 eyes, it has arms, it floats, and after that, you start generating much better.
Yeah. So often between here and here, there is this hidden step, which is meta prompt construction. Hey, here's my task. What information do you need to help me achieve that? And what form should I give it to you in? There is often a loop back at this phase where it's like, okay, well, I executed it, everything was trash. This is the step that I need to touch. Please help me with that. I have given up on image-based queries. I find the output so maddeningly wrong that I will just draw it on paper myself and then beg someone to help me.